Hello everyone, what's up? It's me, Dan, moderately known as MTG. I am here with the illustrious Ken Baumann, member of cEDH, winner of Tier 1 Con. We're here to talk about Ken's experience with Tier 1 Con and beyond, and maybe a little bit before too. But yeah, Ken, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Ken. I run the YouTube channel cEDH. We make videos about Commander, both casual and competitive. I maintain the Krark Discord, which is called The Thumbless, and I maintain 3 primers for 3 cEDH Krark lists: Krark Sakashima, Krark Thrasios, and Krark Timna. Outside the world of Magic, I'm a writer. Currently, I'm working on a Kickstarter, basically fulfilling a Kickstarter campaign in which I promised to write a big, long, good fantasy novel for folks. So if you're curious about that and my other writing, or any of my Magic stuff, you can go to kenbaumann.com.
And that link will be in the video description right down below this video. Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, just like some pre-Tier 1 Con preparations. First of all, huge congratulations on winning. I'm very, very proud of you, my friend. That was...
Thank you.
Who would have thunk it? Like, I know that you're a fantastic player, but this is certainly a tourney of a lot of fantastic players, and we knew like a lot of good ones were on the docket. But seeing you coming out of day one in what, 13th place, I think?
Yeah, day one was 13th, or 13th or 12th, and then when I made the cut to top 16th, I was 6th. And I was like, ooh, this is getting spicy.
I was very, very overjoyed, and I was like, ooh, Ken's so good at playing Magic. Ken could really do this.
I tell you what, when I watched back all the stream games and saw your commentary and like in the chat, I was in hog heaven. I was like, my friends are all the best, and I love them so much. It was so great just to see the homies showing up, and it just made me so happy. So thanks for watching and chatting.
I couldn't have been more proud of you, Ken. I actually went back and rewatched your finals game today just to like get it a little bit fresher in my mind, and it was just incredible the position that you got yourself in that turn 4 to be able to just absolutely just stomp this pot of players. And we'll get to that in a minute. But I opened up the floor on Twitter to see if anyone had some good questions that we might want to ask. And someone actually brought this up, which I thought was an interesting question, that you've talked before on Twitter about how your win rate with Krark and Thrasios, the Riverboat Casino deck, is actually higher than Krark and Sakashima. And they wanted to know what went into your decision to pick Krark and Saka over that. And I guess I'm going to add my thought is I wonder if it has to do... your win rate, rather, has to do with the amount of games that you have played on either respective deck.
Yeah, that is a good question. I'll be honest, I didn't really prepare for this tournament as a particular event that much. And what I mean by that is, like, I asked Tingo or Simon, who placed in the top 4 in the last one, a Krark Sakashima pilot. I was like, what's the meta like over there? What kind of decks do you tend to see? Is there more stacks, not so much stacks? Is it all turbo? People play really responsibly? Or are they just kind of like East Coast players where they just jam the pedal for the most part? And so, he had some good advice about what was going on there and what to expect. But ultimately, and I thought about Krark Thrasios a lot because I was like, well, I feel like it can grind really well, and it has multiple A plus Bs, so you can demonstrate a win very easily and quickly, and it's creature oriented, and that still seems really strong to me. But ultimately, I just got to this point, and it was really when I was like making the blue farm video, where I was just like, no, I know myself. Like, I have something to prove. I have something to prove with this deck in particular, particularly because this deck or this event was organized by Nicholas of Monarch Events and Libby the head judge, and I was like, I gotta go to a Monarch organized tournament on an international stage, and I gotta show that this deck, Krark Sakashima, can be played well. That was ultimately a decision. It wasn't really about win rate. It wasn't really about thinking about, what'll position me for the best chance to win. I was just like, this is my baby, and I want to go show people that it's not a problem. It's fine. You can pilot it well, and it's just like any other deck. So I think that was ultimately it. It wasn't really too mathematical. It was kind of just intuitive. And again, I feel a little cheeky for saying it, but like I didn't really prep that much. I just was sort of like, what am I going to expect? And then I was like, I'll play my favorite deck. We'll see what happens,
That's what I was thinking, is that it seems like you're a very rational person, and like knowing you, like it doesn't seem like you would have gone into this thinking like, what am I going to do to get myself in that top 4 and in the top position? Because I don't feel like you're that kind of person. You're more just like, I'm going to go and I'm going to play well. And you've said it many times that you just wanted to get out of the house and travel safely and have a good time playing Magic with people, which is an extremely noble baseline to have. And I mean, that's what you want to do in these sort of situations. Like there's the literal monetary investment that you're making into getting out to these places and performing in these events, but like, you know, also like you can't put so much pressure on yourself to be in that winning scenario where it's going to cost you your sanity if you're not sitting in the seat because only one person gets to.
Exactly. And that was my goal, just make it, show up, get out of the house, as you said. And then once I started to get some wins and some draws and stuff, and it started to look better and better for me, really started when I started to realize like, oh, I've got a pretty good shot to make the cut to top 16, so make it to the semifinals. I went like, okay, like really I kind of had a sit down moment with myself Saturday night, which Sunday was the sixth round of Swiss and then the cut to the semifinals and finals. I just sort of had a talk with myself. It was like midnight and I was like, I'm gonna go to bed. I want to get some sleep and rest. And then I was like, oh, why? Like, why do I want to go to bed at a reasonable hour and not just like keep jamming Commander or whatever? And I was like, oh, I want to give myself the best shot to play the tightest I can, to beat myself as a player, right? To like overcome my limitations as a player, push them game to game, and to just be perfectly focused on what's in front of me. Just because that was my attitude towards my games. I just was like, I'm just gonna play the hell out of this deck, and I'm gonna really try my best. And I didn't really care about the Time Twister going in, not at all. I didn't even care about it until I won it, to be honest. Then I was like, oh wow, this is big.
Yeah.
But before then, I was just like, no, I just want to play really well and prove that this deck is powerful and prove that it can be piloted well. And then that mindset helped me immensely. I rarely felt nervous the entire run of 3 days. Like, I felt very comfortable, very confident. And in the last couple games, really the last, all Sunday, I just felt pretty dominant in most of the games. Like, you know, I played to my outs, I made intelligent decisions, and I was never really feeling like, oh my God, I'm teetering on the edge of losing. I just always felt like I had something to do. So, I don't know. Maybe I don't know if that mindset is like standard among competitors or not in this field, but it definitely is the one that helps me just to try to, you know, do the best I can for my own sake and then focus on process and don't really worry about the product.
It seems like you've like pretty closely followed the constructive model of like knowing your deck very well and then just playing from the most calm perspective that you possibly can and not overworking yourself, because there are lots of people certainly that like do the stay up all night and just jam games to keep practicing all weekend and keep their mind fresh. But like the advantage that we obviously have over like a constructed tournament in this situation is that like you have been playing Krark and Saka for the better part of 2 years now, and like, you know, constructed player is playing whatever the hot meta deck is for like maybe a couple months at a time. Maybe they just picked it up this weekend and they need that practice time, but you have that extra practice time in, so you really get to take advantage of that. Just completely just don't psych yourself out, and also don't run into the numbers game of the more games you play, the more times you're going to lose and the more times you're going to psych yourself out thinking about those losses. Like, I think that's a very smart move to just let it be, trust yourself, you know the deck, you know what you're playing towards, and just go into it with a calm attitude.
Yeah, and I was just vibing, and I really, once I like got the first couple games out of my system on Friday night for the LCQ for the qualifier, all losses by the way, I went 0-3 that night. I just was like, oh, there's like no boogeyman here. Like, there's nothing to be afraid of. Like, this isn't really substantially different from games online or games locally. Like, it's so much better in person. Like, I love playing in person and it's easier for me in person, but I was like, oh, this is fine. Like, it's just a bunch of regular stuff. Like, there's a little bit of stacks, and there's a little bit of, you know, 4 or 5 color piles, and there's what I'm up to, and it's all good. Like, it felt really good to just know, like, that first night that, like, remind myself that I am in an environment I feel like I really know intimately. And so I didn't feel like I had to do any homework, really.
Yeah.
I just was like, no, I'm just going to trust that I know what's going to be in front of me, and I won't really get surprised, and I didn't really the whole time, and so it was great.
there's a definite fear factor to the sort of the big names like the Sick Robots, etc. of
Yes.
that tournament scene, and like, yeah, psyching yourself out being like the big players. And like, not to take anything away from them, they have proven track records of being fantastic players. I played with them, they're fantastic players. But at the end of the day, you play in strong metas all the time, so it's not your first rodeo by any means. You were speaking earlier to sort of checking out what the meta might be like in the tier 1. What did you find as like what was the meta composition? Was there anything really surprising, or what was the general play attitude, I guess? Did you find it to like be like an amalgamation of lots of different styles of play, because there were a lot of North American and European players there from different areas? But
yeah, I would say, there might have been, I didn't find that the play patterns seemed to be inflected that much by like ethnicity or origin for the players. Like, it seemed like everybody was playing pretty smart, pretty responsibly. And then there are also people who are just going for it who weren't Americans, you know what I mean? Like, it was kind of all over the place. And so I was like, all right, well, this is good. There was sort of like a minimum quality, like a pretty high minimum quality. And there are obviously some players who are new, who were like, just, this was maybe their first cEDH tournament or one of their first cEDH tournaments. It was mine too, by the way. But who you could tell, like, they were a little nervous, or they didn't really know certain cards and interactions. And so that, that happened. But no, and in terms of deck composition, like, I expected to see a lot of Tymna and Thrasios X decks, and there were a lot of Tymna and Thrasios X decks. And this was entirely unsurprising to me, made a lot of sense. And I felt really good and confident because I will play against those decks all day on Krark Sakashima. I love playing against mid-range-ish 4 or 5 color piles. I'm like thriving there. I know how to do it. There was plenty of blue farm, right? Plenty of turbo decks. But again, I didn't feel nervous about those. I felt like going in, I knew how to mulligan appropriately for those games. And then there were the stacks decks, and I got very lucky in that because of the seedings and the pairings, I did not get paired with any Najeela decks, so that was sick. I got to just skirt by the Najeela matchup, which is a tough one for Krark Sakashima. But otherwise, I just kind of played against some usual stuff and some really fun stuff. Like, there was an Esper Stacks deck that was just beating people into a pulp that I really love to see. And Jessica Shy, I like that deck a lot. I got to play against that. And Rocco, in the semifinals match. And that was fun. But really, I mean, the nice thing about all my work with cEDH Guide is, like, I know at this point what that card pool looks like. I just, like, there wasn't a card where I was like, what's that do?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, cool. All right, well, this is good. The limited patterns are defined, and that made me feel really comfortable in general. But no, nothing locally that felt really divergent from what you and I kind of, or what anybody watching this would expect if they played a good amount of cEDH.
Do you feel like your work on cEDH Guide over the past couple months has, like, really informed your playing to any certain degree?
I think so. I just think that it has made me become familiar, really, really familiar with the most common cards and the most common win cons. Like, like those, 4+ color decks, I feel like I could close my eyes and tell you their deck lists, like, without even, thinking. I just feel so, like, ready at hand in my mind. And it's like, okay, maybe there's, like, they're running a Sacred Guide instead of, they're running, like, there's an extra little layer, or, it's a Hermidruid version, and, like, whatever. So they got the Hermidruid package. But otherwise, I'm like, okay, they're just going to be playing a lot of good cards, and so I'll expect that. And then the decks that, were a little rarer, like Rocco or Tymna Sakashima, maybe, Isan, etc. There were some more unknowns there, but again, the archetypes prevailed. I was like, okay, like, this is grindy, a little bit stacksy Isan, so I know what those decks look like. And so, yeah, I think the cEDH Guide work has helped me immensely feel comfortable, like, sitting across from a deck and anticipating what it's going to do, and anticipating sort of what their outs are and what they might be mulliganing towards. Like, my biggest worry for the whole tournament, or not worry, I was just like, I was made sure to be very, very conscious while mulliganing against turbo decks, and very, very conscious while mulliganing against decks that run Drannith. I never wanted to get got by the Drannith that comes down before Krark, and I never did because I mulliganed appropriately, and I never wanted to get got by like the super early Nas, and I never did because I mulliganed appropriately. And so just knowing sort of like, okay, what do I need? What are like the 2 or 3 things I need to keep in mind when I'm looking at my openers? That helped a lot because it didn't feel like, I wasn't like the meme of like the math lady, like big braining myself. I was just like, there are a couple things. So just remember those couple things and you'll probably be okay, and then get lucky a lot, which happened.
The Krark motto, obviously.
Yes.
But that kind of meta knowledge is really absolutely invaluable to that sort of that play environment because, like knowing what your opponent's deck is capable of and knowing what your own deck is capable of is just the difference between life and death. And I mean, it perfectly showed up in the last match, in your finals match with the pod composition, who I believe it was the Timna Sakashima player said that they had never played against that deck before. Yeah, and like obviously like that is a huge... Like, that's a huge advantage for you, just someone who has literally never played against the most complicated deck in cEDH before that you are a master of. And then, I remember you calling it on the Najeela player, having the Derevi in hand and trying to go for that turn 4 win right behind you.
Yep.
And I definitely want to talk to you about the politicking situation there because I know that you talked about how important it was in the entire weekend, but I'm sure in that situation too, because there was a long politicking situation there. But we also saw it in the Yisan player and tapping out for the Yisan. I think it's going into turn 4. The Yisan player has 3 mana, and they've got Yisan in the command zone, a Trinisphere, and Summoner's Pact, and Chalice of the Void, and maybe a land in hand or something to that effect. And they chose to tap out for the Yisan rather than going for the Trinisphere, and I fully understand their position of saying, I want to put myself on this board. I don't want to play table police in 4th position and try to be the only thing holding this thread together while Najeela player just goes off. And knowing that the Najeela player has the Derevi in hand, like, that just absolutely hands Papa Sock the win potentially in that position. It's possible for you to fight through the 3-ball, but it's obviously a lot more difficult. So it's very interesting to see the way that the pod compositions and everything worked in certain favors there. What was it like to sit down at this table? What were you thinking of the matchup and the pod composition? How did you feel going into that match?
Well, I felt pretty good. I knew what to expect from Najeela. Like I played Najeela for a long time, so I know that deck super well, and I felt very comfortable being in front of it. And Timna Sakashima, I also, we got the chance to look at all the deck lists when there's the cut to top 16. So I had, I spent about 30 minutes browsing through the deck list, making sure I wasn't going to miss anything that would get me. And so I remembered that list and kind of knew what it would be up to. And then Yisan as well. I was like, okay, like early Oof, early Trinisphere, stuff like that. Bear in mind, and I think that I got lucky in many respects for that pod, and it made me feel really confident going in. The first piece of luck was that I was in the first seat. I was like, okay, wow, like I guess I have the best record here. Sounds good. Like the second thing was both the Timna Sakashima player and the Yisan player, they got stuck on mana.
Yes.
And I was like, okay. So I kept a hand that kind of had everything in it. It wasn't that fast, but it had everything I needed. It had mana production, it had a ritual, it had interaction, it had a cantrip. And I was like, okay, this is a slow-ish but steady turn 3 or turn 4. And I just really, the whole time that in the pod, I was like, I don't think, like, maybe there's a Drannith. That's fine. Like, I'm gonna risk it. I read the table when I was mulliganing, and I was like, based on what I could tell about their hands and sort of their reactions to it, I was thinking, like, I'm gonna make the bet that there's no Drannith and that I don't get locked out. And then when the Yisan player fired off a Worldly Tutor, I was like, oh no, like, it's gonna be oof. And like, but because they had played a Chrome Mox, I was like, no, they're not going to lock themselves out of mana. So I also was like, whoo, just like the table conspired, the circumstances of the table conspired to make me feel really comfortable. But I felt really good going into that game. And I also felt really, and maybe the people in the audience who did this can now kind of reflect upon their decisions, but the not hecklers, the people in the audience who were like oohing and awing when like a silence got put in the stack against me, it just made me feel so powerful. I was like, I'm going to just ruin these people's day. And so really, like, it really got me fired up. So like I knew that I was sort of going in as the bad guy on this deck, and
Yes.
like absolutely, I knew I was like the heel, and so I made sure to not, I'm not like that at the table. Like we had a really lovely game, the four of us, and we're all very polite to one another and respectful, and like the game went well. Just from that perspective, like we had a good time, and nobody felt like their feelings got hurt. Nobody got lied to. It was good on the level gameplay. But I made sure to do that because I wanted to make the players know that like I'm in this game with y'all. I don't care about these jokers on the outsides. Like I'm playing this game with you, and we made it. Right? I wanted to make all of us feel like we should be happy right now. We should be celebrating ourselves. We're at the top four, and this is our experience. So I made to really like make sure everybody felt on the same page out of the gate. And I think that really helped too, because I mean, I don't do that for rhetorical reasons. I just do it because it's the right thing to do. But it also does help the other opponents. Like it helps them. What's the word? Like not panic when you do stuff, because they know that like you will be a reasonable person. You'll answer questions. You can talk through stuff. And so that made me feel really good too. Like all the players were very on the level and respectful, and I was like, okay, we're gonna have a good time, and we're gonna play really tight Magic. And then as soon as the crowd started oohing and awing, I was just like, I'm gonna ruin these people's day. Like I wanna make this audience like absolutely just feel powerless. And I just want to dominate. So it was like that fun little Michael Jordan thing. Don't ooh and ah me and be like, ooh, the silence is going to stop him. Like I am going to go as hard as I possibly can. So that was great. It was a good combination of elements, like respectful table plus audience that was kind of jeering. And I was like, I'm in heaven. Like I'm in heaven right now.
Perfect, honestly. It honestly speaks a lot to you in that scenario, because like if this was a legacy tournament, there is not a chance in the fucking world that someone would look at their opponent who has never played against their deck before and say, I'll let you know how to interact with this. Not a problem at all. There's a time twister on the line. We're just here to have fun. But Ken is just built different.
That's true. Like, I definitely didn't give them the answers to the test, but they did, when they did ask questions about like, how do these things work? What do these cards do? I didn't try to hide anything, and I did make sure to kind of talk through like, sure, you guys could do this or you could do that, and like, here are the pros and cons to each. And obviously I had my rhetorical positioning with those things to try to weight them in favor one or the other, but again, I wasn't being a smart ass, and I wasn't being disrespectful. But it was also one of those games where I felt like I just had the nuts, like I was like, I never really felt in that fourth turn that what they were going to do was going to matter that much. I felt like this is my game, and I'm pretty confident I'm not going to lose it. And so, when they got to those crucial decision points where I knew they were going to make a mistake, or it seemed like they're going to make a mistake, I didn't stop them. But I definitely did feel like, okay, even if they make the correct decision here, I'm still in such a dominant position that really I just need to buy a little time, and I'll probably be okay to untap and go for it again. It just was that kind of game where you just feel like, okay, I got everything.
I think it makes a lot of sense to do that in most situations when you're on Krark anyway, because as a Krark player, you just naturally have to do a lot of talking. Like, not even just like putting spells on the stack, but also just like explaining what your spells do, explaining what's about to happen on the stack. And there are so many opportunities to like win yourself good favor with the table and let them know, like,
yes,
I'm not trying to pull one over on you. I'm just trying to like go through this accurately, and you can make all of these decisions. But yeah, it's important. I want to ask you about, like, we're in the first big stack on that fourth turn. We've got you're casting, I think, Impulse, and then we've got Silence on top of that. A Dovin's Veto countering whatever your original spell was.
Yep.
And then you start responding with, I think, an Offer You Can't Refuse on top of that. Yeah. There's like a big long pause in that scenario. I think y'all are talking about like maybe using the Douthie Voidwalker or not, or like where Silence needs to be in the stack and all that kind of stuff. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I had started, I landed the ritual, I landed Sakashima, and then I started doing stuff with Tavern Scoundrel. And so the first thing I did was put a Consider on the stack and get a couple of critters. Right. And so then they started to go like, uh-oh, they kind of saw the writing in the cards, like, there's mana generation, now here's the card draw, and we'll see. And So the silence came down. I thought that was totally appropriate given the information that Papasaka had. That's exactly what he should have done. He probably should have done it earlier, but alas, here we were. And then the Dovin's veto got fired off, targeting the original Consider when I couldn't. It got fired off in response to the silence because the Tim Sakashima player had priority. I think that was really it. They just were in turn order and thought, okay, I really want to make sure that this card draw just leaves the stack. And that's also reasonable. That's a thing that you want to do against Krark pilots. Just get the card draw away, get it out of here. And then there was, I had to fire off the offer you can't refuse at the silence, knowing that, okay, this is going to feed the Najeela player mana. Maybe they have more interaction, whatever, it's worth it. And then there was some conversation about, what's the Dothy going to do? What is this Dothy going to do this turn? They hadn't really lit upon the idea of firing off that silence like immediately. There was a moment in time in which I had no mana. And that's when the concerted defense was on the stack, targeting my copy of offer targeting silence to try to prevent that. There's a moment somewhere in that chain where they would have had a line where they could have countered the silence. Dovin's vetoed the silence to put it under Douthie, and then cracked Douthie to cast silence before I could interact. And that would have been pretty backbreaking. But there's really the most of the conversation was between the three players just tracking the stack and going like, what do we actually care about countering? What are we going to get off the stack? But Papasaka was slow rolling that he had that demonic consultation, which he wound up burning for abrupt decay, which made my day. I was like, this is fantastic. When he put consultation on the stack, I literally just smiled and was like, I always love seeing a consultation. Like, go for it, And when he named abrupt decay, I was like, I've won the game. And
I was right there with you, my friend.
Yep. Yep.
And again, I understand the
yes,
I understand the desire and I understand the thought process.
Yep.
And it is just misguided and
exactly
indicative of just like the player's experience against that particular deck and what needs to happen in that situation.
Yep. And so that big stack was something, but I felt like, at the end of it, I was like, well, I've got some triggers to draw. And I just kept drawing into gas, Like I found Harmonic Prodigy, and then I found Storm Kiln Artist, and then I found Impulse, and I was just like, okay, I was like, nothing matters. Like I'll always have responses. I'm always gonna have mana generation. They popped the Scoundrel. I was like, fine. Here's Harmonic Prodigy and Scott, all good. The Consider was gone. I was like, here's an Impulse. I just was drawing really hot, and there was one point at which I knew, like, okay, if they silence appropriately, I'll need to resolve my Impulse Krark triggers. I had 4 of them, and I'll need to find interaction because, again, I didn't know for sure. I hadn't seen it yet with Gitaxian Pro, but I knew Najeela had Derevi. I just felt it. And so I was like, I'm going to need to find interaction. But in those Impulse flips, they didn't wind up silencing me at the correct time, but there was a Force Will, and there was a Flusterstorm. And I was like, okay, I could have grabbed those and just waited and just forced once per turn cycle and then tried to untap. So again, the deck was just really sending me the message of like, better to be lucky than good, Ken, and like just do the thing like how you know to do it and trust that it'll work out for you. And just all felt there. Even though that game, that last turn was like over an hour, I would say, and this is not pejorative at all, this is what it is, I'd say that 80+% of that was the three players discussing what to do.
Absolutely, and again, not to put down those players because, like we said, one of them has literally never played against it, so this is a brand new experience. But the thing is that, like, it does, like, part of what we said earlier about, like, being honest with your table talk in that situation is that, like, these players are going to panic when there's a silence on the stack and a Dovin's veto on the stack against you, and you have 4 triggers under them and 4 triggers on top of them because you cast 2 spells. Like, that, the math isn't mathing.
Yes, exactly.
There's just
shouldn't be happening.
It's very easy to get overwhelmed by that deck because it is a very overwhelming deck, and it's one of its biggest strengths. And that that mental effort of putting those opponents through there, like, it's sort of no wonder that they made those sort of like weird decisions that sort of cost them the game in those final turns, or that final turn rather, of using the Abrupt Decay twice rather than the Silence twice, and a couple other like very small scenarios where you were just too pinched on mana, didn't have the cards in hand, and they could have interacted in a slightly different way given what we eventually know about the composition of their hands. It takes a whole lot of table talk between your three opponents to stop a Krark deck. And the thing is that like you stop it once and it's not even over. Scoop was saying in the chat during that final turn that like it doesn't matter if the Silence resolves because Ken will just do this again next turn. That's given that like the Derevi doesn't land and nothing happens, but like you still have the outs of like what you consider your impulse or whatever it was in that situation. So like there are just all of these outs that make it a really like insurmountable just amount of triggers and spells, and it's very, very difficult.
That's at one point you can see me in the video, like I pick up the Concerted Defense and the Dovin's Veto, and I asked the players, I was like, are you okay if I just visually put these where they belong in the stack just so that everybody's on the same page? Because I was, anytime it comes to like stack visual representation, I want to help my opponents as much as possible. Because again, I'm not trying to win on a gotcha. I'm trying to win because I played really tightly and got luckier than they did. So that moment I think is indicative of like what the problem, quote unquote, at the table was, that I felt really comfortable with Krark bullshit, and I think those players didn't feel as comfortable. Plus, I just had a hand, like a hell of a hand, and so I think that plus the pressure of the final table, plus the fact that like I can play an hour-long Krark turn all day long. I love it. Like, and I love fighting off like the big war of resources thrown at me. Like, that is me in my ideal circumstance, and that is them in a less than ideal circumstance. And so I think that disparity as well was very evident, that like I felt like I'm in my element. This isn't stressing me out. I'm having fun. Like, the head judge was right there, and I was like, I am totally confident that I'm playing super tightly, and he will catch me on my bullshit if I'm not. So I felt like supported by the fact that past experience plus present circumstances put me in a situation where I was like, I'm just having a blast, and the fact that the audience was kind of making it like a wrestling match, where I was like, this could not be more enjoyable for me, and that disparity that's tough when you're an opponent playing against somebody who just is like just making the stack a tornado of hell. It's like smiling. That's got to be upsetting.
Can't relate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We saw as you were resolving your Mind's Desire for 21 or 22, which was the highlight of my life, for that being the game-winning spell of Tier 1 Con. You flipped over a lot of new cards. I was just looking at the list today where you've changed to, I think, about like maybe 10-ish slots. Doing a lot more with the graveyard now with Finale of Promise is the red one coming back in. We've got Ledger Shredder, and Gale was the one that I saw that I was like, I've been thinking about Gale, and I'm glad that other people have also been thinking about Gale.
Yeah, I'm leaning into it. I mean, Shredder just has proven itself in a few games and other circumstances just like a little too good not to include, because the card selection is just really, really excellent. This is the kind of deck where I don't think it's quite an intuition deck, right? And that's why I cut intuition. It's not so good that you can just like put anything in your bin and be okay. But I do think that because it is so, what is the hip word? Layered, or in other words, it has a bunch of redundancies. Because it has so many redundancies, card selection is just fine. You can, you can just be like, all right, I have a cantrip in my hand. I'm going to Shredder. I'm going to connive trigger until I find a better one, or until I find something like a Jessica's Will, or like I don't really care what it is. I'm just looking for like a better piece of action, or like I just really need a ritual right now. Just let's burn through the hand. And then Gale is there because it's low to the ground. It's easy to cast early, and it also is very synergistic. Like great with Harmonic Prodigy and Veyron, and it opens up instant speed lines. You can like, if you've got a grape shot in the bin and you want to start going over the top of somebody, all you need to do is cast a Consider or something and then pay for the shot, and then you can just kind of loop things. So I never got a chance to I never had a chance to cast Gale or Letter Shredder in this tournament, but Shredder's been good for me earlier, and Gale just seems like a little bit too synergistic not to include. And then Finale of Promise was my replacement for Invoke Calamity. Like, I loved Invoke. It's big, it's splashy, it does crazy, crazy stuff, but I wanted something for this tournament lower to the ground and easier to cast and easier to find off Spellseeker and muddle the mixture and everything. So I was just like, I'm just going to go back to Finale. Like, it was a workhorse, and Invoke is lots of fun, and I think it's great. But for this tournament, I want the deck to be really lean, really low to the ground. I felt like, again, it felt like it was in a really good place.
For tournament considerations, Invoke Calamity is just an absolute nightmare to resolve, so I can understand taking it out for something that is just a little bit more lean and easier to put on and off of the stack. So
yes, exactly.
Can totally understand that.
And more mana base friendly. Like, I went to a mana base of like 16 basics now, because I hated losing to Archon of Emeria and Root Maze and 3 Thalia and stuff. And I was like, I never want to lose to those cards ever again. So I'm not gonna. And that's not true. I have lost those cards. But the mana base, to me, was a good experiment to just ask myself, like, hey, is the conventional wisdom about 2-color mana bases that have City Brass and Exotic Orchard and Forbidden Orchard and all the fetches, like, is that good wisdom, or is that just greed bullshit? And I think now, after this tournament and after games with this mana base I've played before the tournament, I'm like, at least for this deck, we don't need all that fancy stuff. Like, I'm on 1 fetch land, and I never felt like I had mana problems the whole game. I was like, I'm hitting my land drops at 28, playing basics. They're not punishing me. There were a couple games where playing basics were put me ahead because, somebody had an Archon or whatever, and I was the only one who had that tempo. And I was like, this is great. I'm in heaven. Like, again, it was just a really low-risk experiment that has yielded really high ceiling results or whatever, big rewards.
I can understand that. It's a deck that asks for very simple things to happen in order to be very good. Like, I can understand that. Just like, it doesn't really matter which basic is casting the cantrip that ends the game, because it'll be fine either way. There's lots of ways to make. There's lots of rituals, lots of treasure production. It makes a lot of sense to me. I can see that. Yeah. I'm interested that you're in on Muddle the Mixture now. I remember when I first went on that deck, it was something that I was interested in. That you told me that I think that people had talked about before, but you weren't quite interested in. What are your favorite hits with it now? What makes you a little bit stronger on it?
I think that for this tournament, I wanted a little bit more deterministic line to breach, and I also thought that it's mana intensive, but it's also uncounterable. And that's why I also put Step Through in. I just want uncounterable tutors. It seems really good.
Instant speed on the Step Through is really nice too.
I know, for real. Yeah, because it allows you to represent interaction, just something kind of innocuous like a cantrip, and then it's like, I have a Harmonic Prodigy, and they're like, fuck. So Step Through is excellent. Muddle, I just think it's flexible, and I think that when you're in Izzet, you just got to make use with the tools that you got in terms of tutors, and that's just a tool that we've got. But the deck really rarely feels like it's not producing enough mana and treasures these days, and so I'm like, 1 blue, 1 blue for any 2-drop, that seems just fine. And whether it's Breach, or whether it's Impulse, or whether it's Harmonic Prodigy, or Dockside, or whatever, I guess the question to think about Muddle is would you like to spend an uncounterable 3-mana tutor for Dockside, Extortionist, or Underworld Breach? Right, and then framed that way, it's maybe that sounds pretty good, right? People are on Court of Calling, and that has to actually resolve.
People play Imperial Recruiter all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can counter the hell out of that.
Bingo. And so I was like, I just think Muddle just feels to me like it fills a slot. And I also went down with this list a little bit on the amount of disruption to make it a little bit more proactive. And I feel like now it's in a really good sweet spot where it feels like kind of the older list, and it has some lessons carried over from the more proactive post Marquesa 2022 list. And it feels like it has all the tools it needs to deal with every archetype.
Yeah. like I said, it asks for very little to happen for things to start going very well. And yeah, like the action spells are just a big part of it, because again, like it doesn't matter what you put on the stack, it's just going to go on the stack a bunch of times, and that's the important part of getting through it in that sort of fashion. Do you feel like you picked up any big lessons from Tier 1 in any sort of deck compositions or anything that was like making you feel like differently about the way that you're constructing your deck, or maybe things you want to do, or anything that made you feel more confident in the way that you had brought it?
Well, I definitely a couple times missed in the festivities because, my God, there are so many dorks and so many Najila tokens running around. So there were multiple games where I was like, oh God, that'd be nice right now. Like I would hose people. But no, ultimately I felt really, like the deck felt really good. It felt like it is a commander-centric primary game plan, revolves around the commander type deck. And with this build, I just was like, okay, like I'm gonna lean into it. Like we don't need to be afraid of that anymore. If it gets housed, it gets housed. But there are so many pieces of interaction that can get rid of the stuff that slows down commander-centric strategies that I'm just gonna trust that the deck is balanced, you know, and kind of proportionally relevant for any given pod. And it really proved itself to be true. Like I really did feel like it had about the right amount of interaction for any given situation, and some old cards that were all stars are back in and they were feeling great. You know, like Lightning Bolt, for instance. And no, I really walked away just feeling really grateful for the deck and what the deck can do, and particularly like it made me feel really confident piloting against like 4+ color piles. I was like, this deck I think has a really bright future. You know, the ceiling is a lot higher for its growth than it is for 4-color decks and 5-color decks, because they're not going to power creep Demonic Tutor, but they might power creep Consider. They might power creep Impulse. They might power creep, you know, Ska. God, I hope they don't. I mean, that'd be like ludicrous. But you know, like we just have a higher ceiling for progress over time. And I felt really great. Even in the losses and the draws, I never felt like, oh man, like I've made some huge mistake. I was always like, no, like the deck gave me a good hand and I had options and outs and things to do. And it just feels really plugged in. It feels really dialed in right now. So I'm not walking away with any huge like deck construction lessons other than just, you know, be really attentive to what other people get up to, learn from their experiments, and trust the like wisdom that the card community has accumulated. Like we know which cards are good. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, and we don't need to lean away so much from the deck's main game plan. The deck wins because it does its thing, and so we'll just keep making it do its thing primarily. And then, you know, if we can't, oh well, we're playing cool cards in Izzet. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen?
What about in terms of playstyle? Any sort of ways that you feel like you're approaching the game differently, like from the table perspective? I know you talked a lot about like learning a lot that that you're like table talk and politicking was extremely important to this weekend for you.
Yes, absolutely. Like I'm more confident now than ever that like you really, from the second the game starts, everything matters, and you can always be doing something. That doesn't mean talk all the time. In fact, that means definitely don't talk all the time, because that's quite telling. But you can almost always find something helpful to do for yourself, be it react to a spell, or point out a piece of information, or make a recommendation to the table, or ask a question, or just be engaged, be attentive. And just, you know, I really kind of leaned into my gut for the tournament and trusted that like my many years of like playing social games would just kind of kick in, you know, and I would like have the correct intuitions of like, oh, right now, like I really should talk about silence, because I don't want them to think I'm clamming up about it. So I'm going to talk about it, and hopefully that will make them feel like, oh, maybe he's like okay with the silence. Like maybe the abrupt decay is a better thing. Like just trust your gut. So that really was useful. And also just in-person cEDH, it became so clear to me how much more effective talking is in person than it is on spell table games and stuff. Like it's just when you're in person and you can read body language and you can see cues about when's the right time to speak and stuff, it's so much easier. to be an effective political player than when you're just like listening to the headphones and hoping not to interrupt people. So yeah, I would recommend that any cEDH player who wants to do well in a tournament setting, and again, I'm no pro, I've only done it well. I've done it once, like guys like Sick and Spleen, go ask them what to do for a long tournament career. But at least from my perspective, if you want to do well at a tournament, be willing to talk and be willing to listen and be willing to be engaged at all times, because you have to, in my experience, I had to fight for everything. And every little fight mattered.
Nice, awesome. Well, I think that probably brings us like about to the end of our session here. So I appreciate you coming and hanging out. This is a ton of fun. Thanks so much. And again, a huge congrats to you, Ken. So proud of you for this really excellent, and very proud of you for doing some excellent Magic playing that I know that you're very capable of doing. So thanks for coming and hanging out with us today. Do you have anything else you want to leave us with before we get out of here?
No, I just say if people are curious about the deck, just look up Siskel and Ebert on Moxfield, and then that's basically the portal to take you anywhere that you're curious about. And I'd say that, for folks who are thinking about competing in cEDH tournaments, maybe you haven't before, my experience about an IRL cEDH tournament was it was full of lots of lovely people. It was lots of fun. The games were, yes, they were charged and they were focused, but it was fun. It was a fun experience. I really recommend doing it if you feel safe doing so. And I would say that, don't worry if you lose. Again, that first night on Friday night, I went 0-3. And I was like, well, I'm just going to still show up and try the next thing the next day. And then I won the thing. So don't let the losses get you down. Really focus on your process and what your goals are. And you'll have a blast, and it'll be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ken. Everyone, thank you for watching. We'll catch you next time. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, one of the best ways to support us is by leaving a comment and hitting that like and subscribe button. It's incredibly helpful and always appreciated. If you want to support the channel more directly, join our Patreon to catch episodes early, join our private Discord, and get some other awesome benefits. One final thank you to all of our patrons who make great content like this possible. And thank you for watching. Be good to yourself, everyone.